Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Connecticut. My name is Charles Warner, and I am currently serving as the chairman of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. And I have the distinct pleasure of being your host today for this special and hopefully riveting episode of Connecticut Freedom Trail Conversations at Noon. We are brought to you through the efforts of the Connecticut Freedom Trail State Historic Preservation Office, the Connecticut Old State House, and the wonderful staff there. My guests today are Tammy Denease and Joy Burns, two people who will be bringing very important information about a pivotal Connecticut historical and worldwide really event, the Amistad incident. Tammy Denease will be talking to us about Amistad captive and eventually freed person Sarah Margu, and Joy Burns will be talking with us today about 6 not commonly known facts about the Amistad incident. The Amistad Affair really is home for the Connecticut Freedom Trail because it is this incident and its commemoration and its community sort of honoring the memory of it in our Connecticut community that brought together a group of people in New Haven at its 150th anniversary, the Amistad Committee. Today, the Amistad Committee is still functioning, and the Amistad Committee helped to coordinate efforts across the state to remember and raise up the history of the Amistad Affair because so many towns and locations across the state had direct ties to the incident. From this combination of people remembering this incident, eventually the Connecticut Freedom Trail was formed and born, and we are here today, over 30 years later, to share information and to educate the community. And I'm privileged to have both Tammy and Joy here with us. Tammy Denease serving as the outreach director for the Connecticut Freedom Trail and her, I would say spare time, but it's barely spare. And her other life, Tammy, is the executive artistic director of a stage company called Hidden Women. And the purpose and the mission of the stage company is to bring hidden historical women figures to life. And today, Tammy will be talking to us about the hidden figure, Sarah Margu. Tammy, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Charles. I appreciate the welcome. Yes, Sarah Margu. She was one of 4 children aboard the Amistad. Most people are familiar with the movie that Steven Spielberg made. But one of the things I want to talk about the movie, before Steven Spielberg actually did the movie, Miss Debbie Allen, I want to make sure she gets her credit. It took her 13 years to get someone to listen to her to tell this story that was forgotten or lost in history. And it is because of her I was inspired to learn so much more about the protests aboard the slave schooner. And Sarah Margu was one of the 4 children. As I said, the movie focuses more on the legal case and not so much on the individuals. And it did not mention that there were 4 children aboard. So a lot of people missed that pivotal point that there were 4 little girls aboard the Amistad, one of which was Margu. She would later change her name to Sarah. And her story is so important. And I wanted to bring her to life because I wanted to put the humanity on the story. I wanted to make sure people understood that the individuals that were captive on the schooner were not property. They were not cargo, as history likes to teach. They were human beings. They had families, they had homelands, they were rice farmers, they were carpenters, they were blacksmiths, they were people with everyday lives, had their own language, their own religion. And this is the type of stuff that we weren't being taught or even knew about once the Amistad story came out. So I like to tell Sarah's story from the point of view of her origins, where she knew who she was, she knew where she came from. She was a part of a rice farming family, and they had values. They had the village, in a sense where even though all of them that were in that village were not related by blood, they were still family. And so when the 53 Mindy and those surrounding in the surrounding areas were captured, they were taken away from that. They were taken away from what was most familiar to them, their family, their loved ones, their land, even their foods. So things of that nature that doesn't come to light when you're just looking at history as facts and figures. So I needed to bring this story to life on a whole different level. And so when bringing her to life, I had to do research, and I'm still researching. Just before the pandemic, I was preparing to make my way across the big river to actually visit Sierra Leone. It was called Mindyland at the time, but today it is Sierra Leone, to do further research to make her more in depth of an individual and to bring the 3D humanity to life with her. Hopefully, I'll get to still do that trip one day soon, but we'll see. But in the meantime, the research that I have been doing, I've been able to add layers to her story to help my audience to understand what it was like for her to leave a loving environment, to leave a home, and to be aboard the Takora, which was a bigger ship that enslaved people. And then she was transferred. So from going through the Middle Passage on the Takora, then transferred to a smaller vessel, the La Amistad, which by the way meant friendship. And none of the treatment they received was friendly. And so this little girl and her other three companions, they were children aboard this vessel, aboard this Middle Passage. And so she gets to tell you her story from that point of view. And we've come to realize the horrors of what the Middle Passage was and how it affected individuals, not just being chained, but you get to understand and relive what she lived during that Middle Passage. Now, after she arrives here, she is befriended by Lewis Tappan, who is one of the Tappan brothers of the Anti-Slavery Association. He's also a board member of the Oberlin School in Ohio, Oberlin College, and they would become fast friends. And he would be like a father figure while she's here these 2 years in the United States, and their friendship would go beyond that. So they actually go from strangers to friends during the time that she meets him. And he would be her comforter, because when they have that very first trial, she's not understanding the language that's being spoken. She's not understanding the tongue, but she's very much afraid because the children in the villages had been warned of the pale-faced, lipless ghost with the stringy hair, brown teeth, bad breath, and no upper lip, how they would eat them. So now, being a part of this court case, she's surrounded by all of these pale-faced ghosts that she heard about and thought was just a legend or a folk tale. And so imagine being this little girl in the room, and you're seeing everyone looking at you, and these are the people that you were always warned about. These were the ghosts or the myths that have come to life. So I am able to bring that to life so that people can understand that this was a little girl and her world has been upended and it has been turned upside down. But by the time of the second trial, she can understand the language a little bit more. And now she's understanding what's really happening. And she wants to go home, as all of them do. They just want to go home. And they become this international incident. The Queen of Spain gets involved. And so, again, you have people whose agency has been removed, but yet and still, even though their physical agency has been removed, because of who they were, where they came from, and their community, they had their agency within themselves, even at that little age. Margu was between the age of 9 and 11. And so even at that young age, she had her own agency and she knew who she was. And after the trial, they get to go into Farmington. And they go on these journeys and these speaking tours. And what I love about her story is Sarah Margu even as this little girl, she gets to represent who she is, who her family is, and where she's from. Because in Farmington, as much as history wants us to believe that everyone was welcoming in Connecticut, they were not. They did not treat the Amistad captives as well as they wanted the public to believe. And there's a difference between slavery and abolitionists. And so, even though they were in a community where there were those who did care for them, the greater world in Connecticut did not. So let's not mistake that as, oh, they were quite at home or welcome here. And the general census was because they were Africans and they had the wide noses and the big foreheads, that they were less smart than everyone else in the community. And so one of the things that I love to do with her story is I have her read from their religious book, their Bible, and she literally read from the book of Psalms, chapter 54. And that is a book that actually condemns the very people who had held her captive, but yet it is a book about being loving and kind. And so she was able to use that particular book, that particular scripture. And although they thought it was entertaining, she was actually using their own religious beliefs against them. And in the interim, showing just how talented, just how smart she and her people really were. So that's why I wanted to make sure that when doing the presentation, I included that aspect of it, because they had their own religion and they had their own beliefs. Unlike popular beliefs here that, oh, the savages had to be tamed. No, that was not the case at all. In Africa, they have universities, multiple languages. They had skills. It was not that they needed the Western world to come in to educate them and show them how to live life. They were already living. Sarah would return back to her homeland and then make another trip back to America, where she would go to New York, meet with Mr. Tappan. He would make sure she got into Oberlin College in Ohio. And again, here's another institution that is claiming to welcome the Africans with open arms and treat them like family members. That's not what Margu experienced. And she says that she talks of how she's left alone and how they're isolated. But on the outside, the college is constantly touting how the Africans were welcome and that anyone with their hue was welcome into their school, not knowing that once you got there, you would be isolated and separated. But Margu would go on to complete college, and she would be the first African to do so in this country. And then she would go back to her homeland to head the mission school, where she would teach others about the things she learned in the Western world, while at the same time holding on to her own principles and beliefs. So her story is very captivating because as a young person, she has this dual world that she's got to try to balance. And she misses out on her rites of passage of life. Just like you have the rites of passage in this country and other places, here you might have graduation, sweet 16, bar mitzvahs. Well, she missed out on her rites of passage into adulthood. So imagine what that was like for her being here, and those ceremonies for her, part of her growing up, is taking place without her. It had to have made her feel a sense of loneliness, a sense of helplessness, because she had no control, even though she had that agency within herself, but her physical being could not be where she needed to be. That's why it is so important that when we're telling these historical stories and when we are looking in history, that we have to shift our gaze in history, if you will, so that we can start to see the bigger picture and not just focus on facts and figures, not just look at it from one side. I remember my great grandma used to always say the flattest pancake has two sides. Even if that pancake had a hole in it, you flip it over, there's still another side. So there's so many sides of history that we don't get to hear about, that we need to hear about, that has made an impact on the development of our community and our society today, and we don't know it because only one side is being told. And I was talking with someone the other day, and we were talking about making historical connections, and one of the things that we said was, you get this big picture of something, but there's dots and spaces throughout this whole picture, and that's because the whole story is not being told and things are not being connected. So that's why it is so very important that we tell these stories and do the investigation ourselves, dive deep into these stories and try to put on our empathetic shoes, our empathetic hats, and put ourselves in their place and see what was life really like for them, because they were human beings, and just because they lived at a different time, they had challenges like somewhat like what we have today. Some may be more little bit more intense than others, but they were individuals who were put in situations that they had to get out of, and there are life lessons to be learned from those. Charles?
Excellent job, Tammy. As you were talking, I was actually like picturing a new movie, and I'm at the edge of my seat, and so I will revisit actually that particular point with you when we have our discussion period. But excellent job.
Thank you.
Next in line with our conversation about the Amistad Affair, it's my pleasure to introduce to some of you, but some of you, especially those of you who deal in Connecticut history and sort of the time we're in with the reckoning and highlighting the contributions of people who are often overlooked in history. You all will have come in contact with Joy Burns. Joy is a member of the Amistad Committee. She is definitely a very powerful historical researcher. And more recently, Joy has been a longtime original member of the Yale and Slavery Working Group. And it is my pleasure to have you here, Joy, because I always say that Joy's perspective and the way she contextualizes historical events is certainly unique and like none other that I have come across, and I always learn so much. And I'm glad that the public has an opportunity to hear you, Joy. And Joy will be sharing with us today 6 um, not so well known topics related to the Amistad Affair. Joy, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much, Charles. And let's start with my first slide. So this is a photograph actually of discovering Amistad, of the current Amistad replica that whenever we see it on the water in the New Haven Harbor or up in Mystic, it just brings the story of the Amistad straight back to us and makes it really tangible. The next slide, please. And so this is a quote from a New York newspaper, and I think it's important to understand that when the Amistad arrived, and the stories circulated in newspapers all across the United States, because they were now able to transmit those kinds of stories relatively quickly. And when we think of prison, we think of bars and guards, and that was not what the New Haven jail was like at that time. So here's a newspaper reporter in September of 1839. The scenes that daily take place here in the prison, here in consequence of this excited feeling, are ludicrous in the extreme. Parsons go to preach to them, philosophers to experiment on them, professors to pick up a knowledge of their language, phrenologists to feel their heads, and young ladies to look and laugh at them. If you've ever been to the New Haven Green, you may have been close to the stage where the shows usually take place. And it is actually that area in the New Haven Green where the Amistad captives would exercise. And they would do these acrobatic feats. Tammy will tell you, I think, a little bit about the society that some of the Amistad men, and particularly Sengbe Pie, were members of. And they were fighters, they were athletes, they trained. And so this was their opportunity to go out, get some exercise, and to demonstrate their prowess. And they did this, and it was amazing to all of the spectators. And newspaper reporters wrote about them as well. There were wax figures that were cast of the Amistad captives, and the wax figures traveled throughout the United States so that people could get an idea of what their stature was and what their physical, the shape of their faces, their bodies, what they looked like. Next slide, please. So the community of New Haven was very committed to their care. The Tappan brothers, who were actually, Lewis Tappan was from New York. His brother Arthur had moved to New Haven during this time. And they started the Amistad Committee. It wasn't just a collective of white people, it was also a collective of Black people as well. And there was a physician at the Yale School of Medicine, Charles Hooker, who actually became very interested and was their physician and their caregiver during the time that they were in New Haven. And so in November of 1839, amongst the papers of the Amistad Center down in New Orleans, there is a letter that Charles Hooker wrote to Lewis Tappan. Dear Sir, your favor of the 15th instructions were received by Mr. Townsend. That's Amos Townsend, who was a citizen of New Haven. I apprise you, sir, that the health and comfort of the Africans have been subjects of my earnest attention ever since they were committed to my medical care. Dissatisfaction having been expected in some of the backers from New York and elsewhere in regard to the clothing and other accommodations of the Africans, on the 9th, first, I received from the Marshal a communication requesting from me a statement in regard to their sickness, clothing, etc. My reply, to which I would by leave and refer to you, has been communicated to the Journal of Commerce. So in other words, there were Black churches who were involved. Talcott, where Reverend James Pennington was very involved in regarding their care, providing food and clothing to them, as well as churches in New Haven. Dixwell Congregational Church, that's the name today. Back then it was called the African Church or Temple Street Church, was very involved in their care and in their daily needs, and making sure that they were provided for. There were also societies in New York. One of them was called the Philomathian Society, and another was the Phoenix Society. And these were organizations of Black abolitionists who became very interested in the Amistad captives as well, and especially interested that they were cared for correctly, that they had warm winter clothes and things like that. The next slide, please. So when we think about the story of the Amistad, we're hearing the stories of the adults. And this is a drawing that was done by William Townsend, who was, I think, the nephew of Amos Townsend. And this is a collie who was a boy of about 11 years old. Tammy was one of the girls, 9 years old. Margu, who Tammy just spoke of, was 12 years old. Cagney, one of the other girls, was 10 years old. The Spanish cabin boy, Antonio, who was actually an enslaved African person, was 16 years old. And then James Covey, the translator for the Mende people, was actually, at the time that he was the interpreter, 14 years old. So when you see the movie, all these people look like adults. James Covey is portrayed as an adult, but he was actually a 14-year-old boy at the time that this happened. And Antonio, while he was able to speak Spanish, he also probably spoke an African dialect as well, and was an enslaved African person by the Spanish captain of the ship. And so next slide, please. So their life in New Haven, when we think about the the captives in New Haven, we think about them being in the jail the whole time, and they actually weren't. After the first court case, and while they were waiting for the Supreme Court case to happen, they were actually sometimes in the New Haven jail, and then at other times all the way out in Westville, on the Pendleton farm or on the grounds of the almshouse, which was a place in New Haven where poor people would stay. And they were actually asked to perform certain tasks like farming, or they would be leased out to people to work on their properties, to do woodworking or whatever skills they had. And this was something that happened to the captive Africans as well. The children, so that's Antonio, Cagney, Tammy, Margu, and Kale, all lived with the Pendletons, who was the jailer in New Haven. Kale had the unique opportunity of being able to travel back and forth between the prison and the Pendleton home. So I guess the jailer, Mr. Pendleton, would take Kale with him. And Kale was also unique in that he learned English incredibly quickly. So this is a letter that he actually, I'm going to just reel back just a little bit. John Quincy Adams went to visit the captives in Westville in November of 1840. In the movie, Cinque is taken to see John Quincy Adams at his home and meets him in the greenhouse with all the beautiful flowers. But in the real life story, John Quincy Adams comes to New Haven and goes probably to the Pendleton home or to another farmhouse where the captives were staying. And he sits down at just a regular farmhouse table with the captives, and he speaks to them. And of course, James Covey is there to interpret for them. This is a letter that Kale, that young boy, wrote to John Quincy Adams on January 4th of 1841, so a couple of months after the meeting. Dear friend, Mr. Adams, I want to write a letter to you because you love Mende people and you talk to the Grand Court. We want to tell you one thing. Jose Ruiz say we born in Havana. He tell lie. We stay in Havana 10 days and 10 nights. We stay no more. We all born in Mende. We no understand the Spanish language. Mende people been in America 17 moons. We talk American language little, not very good. We write every day. We write plenty letters. We read most all time. We read all Matthew and Mark and Luke and John and plenty of little books. We love books very much. We want you to ask the court what we done wrong. What for Americans keep us in prison? Some people say Mende people crazy. Mende people dolt because we no talk American language. Marika people no talk Mende language. America people dolt. He's talking about Americans. America people dolt. They tell bad things about Mende people, and we no understand. Some men say Mende people very happy because they laugh and have plenty to eat. Mr. Pendleton come and Mende people all look sorry because they think about Mende land and friends we no see now. Mr. Pendleton say Mende people angry. White men afraid of Mende people. Then Mende people no look sorry again. That why we laugh. But Mende people feel sorry. Oh, we can't tell how sorry. Some people say Mende people no got souls. Why we feel bad? We know God's souls. We want to be free very much. Dear friend, Mr. Adams, you have children. You have friends. You love them. You feel very sorry if Mende people come and carry them all to Africa. I feel bad for our friends, and our friends all feel bad for us. Americans no take us in ship. We on shore, and Americans tell us slave ship catch us. They say we make you free. If they make us free, they tell truth. If they no make us free, they tell lie. If America people give us free, we glad. If they no give us free, we sorry. We sorry for Mende people little. We sorry for America people great deal, because God punish liars. We want you to tell court that Mende people no want to go back to Havana. We no want to be killed. Dear friend, we want you to know how we feel. Mende people think, think, think. Nobody know what he think. Teacher, he know. We tell him some. Mende people have got souls. We think we know. God punish us if we tell lie. We never tell lie. We speak truth. What for Mende people afraid? Because they got souls. Cook say he kill, he eat Mende people. We afraid. We kill Cook. Then Captain kill one man with knife and cut Mende people plenty. We never kill Captain. He no kill us. If court ask who brought Mende people to America, we bring ourselves. Cece, hold the rudder. All we want is make us free. Your friend, colleague. May I have the next slide? And so just to go over, there were several Black abolitionists who really were very knowledgeable and attentive to the care and the well-being and the fact that the Amistad captives would have the correct kind of legal support. James W. Pendington from Hartford and Talcott Church, Amos Beeman, who was from Middletown and became the pastor at the Temple Street Church, Robert Purvis, an abolitionist in Philadelphia, James Fortin, a very notable and wealthy abolitionist in Philadelphia, Thomas Van Rensselaer, one of the members of the New York Vigilance Committee, who regularly would transport runaway enslaved people from Philadelphia to New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and up to Canada. Many Black mutual aid societies and Black churches from Maryland, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, just Black churches all up and down the Eastern Seaboard that sent money and clothing and support, and most especially fundraised to send the Amistad captives home. Last slide, please. John Warner Barber was an engraver in New Haven, and I went and read his diaries. And so here is a page from his diary, April 1840. He would go to the prison and also go out to the farm in Westville, and he would draw, make drawings of the Amistad captives. And so here we are, April 25th. In the morning, sundries. In the afternoon, drawing Africans. And then on the 27th, drawing the Amistad massacre. So he actually interviewed the Africans with James Covey as the interpreter, and then he made a very large engraving of the massacre that was printed in newspapers, printed in magazines, and a very large, oops, here's my hands, very large copy of the engraving also to the United States, so that people could kind of get a very graphic idea of what happened during the all of the events that, that led to the captives ending up on the Connecticut shoreline. So I will give it back to Charles.
See, I was right. Both of you, Tammy and Joy, have really offered us a fresh perspective that really makes this historical event jump right off the pages of history. You have added a color and several standalone films around this incident. I mean, absolutely just captivating, both of you, bringing Sarah Margu's life, and then Joy, you providing all the background color to the incident. I have a question, and just for the public, if you are interested in asking a question or having Tammy or Joy answer one of your questions, please send us a question in the chat. And then also, there's a survey that you all can take to let us know how we're doing. If you enjoy the programming and you want more, or if you have a specific topic of interest related to African American history or related items in Connecticut's history, let us know through your survey. But my question for both of you is, oftentimes you hear Singbe PA, also known as Sinke, called the hero of the Amistad. Is that true, in your opinion? And if you have other characters from the Amistad incident that you label a hero, if not Sinke, or additionally, who would it be?
Doesn't matter.
Tammy, we'll start with you and then Joy.
Singbe definitely was a hero, no doubt about it. We need to put them all into context. These were young men. Singbe was about 24, I think. And so he was definitely the hero. The three children, Magu, Kime, and Kanye, they were definite heroes, as well as Kali. I also like to focus on Fune because there is some controversy about Fune. It said he committed suicide, but in reality, according to the Sierra Leoneans, that was just not something that he would have done. Yes, he missed his family like the rest of them did, but being a part of the Porto Society, which is a society, and it's a secretive society. If you are not from that area, you do not know all the goings ons. And I was told if they told you, you would have to die. So I kind of stopped my research at that point because it was like, yeah, no, I'm good. But one of the things that we do know about the Porto Society, as well as the Sunday Society for the young girls, it taught them character. It taught them how to be independent, how to be strong, resilient individuals. So Fune, it is another scenario, is because if you read the history of how he died, he was swimming and he seized up, came up out of the water, and then went back down. That sounds more like an aneurysm than someone committing suicide. So I think Fune was definitely a hero because he was trying to wait to get back home. He was like the rest of them, trying to get home. So I think all of them in their own rights would be heroes.
Joy, same question.
So certainly Sangbe P.A. Sinke, he is, the more you read about him, the more he is such an incredible figure. When you see the painting of him at the New Haven Museum, it's currently touring. I think it's in Los Angeles right now. It's just riveting, and you just stand there for minutes and minutes in awe of his magnificence. But so he definitely is the hero. The girls do something very heroic in that they're the ones who can walk all over this ship. And they do, yes. And they're not afraid to do it. And they go and, they find some loose nails and take the captives the nails so that they can get out of their the chains and things that they were in, and that's how the men were able to go up to the ship and start the mutiny. So the girls are definitely heroic. Kale, I love this little boy. I love him. He has so much spunk. He has no difficulty pushing all the adults to the side, including Sengbe Pie, and taking that microphone at some appearance that they're making after they're freed, and just talking his heart out and telling their story. And just this one letter, and he wrote lots of letters. This boy did not stop. There are I think there's over 8 letters. There's certainly in John Blassingave's slave testimony, which is where this letter was. I think there are 4 or 5, but there are tons of letters out there that this boy wrote because he wanted to make sure that his voice was heard. And I think in terms of when the story is told, that it's very important that his voice is heard. Maybe I'll write a little graphic novel about him or something, because he's so sweet.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting because if you're not someone who sort of has an affinity for this story, or maybe not like a deep scholar, you might not know many of these other voices that you all are sharing with us, many of these other people you're sharing, and this is invaluable because certainly as I sit and listen to you and have listened to you before, I find inspiration, new people to inspire, all kinds of people, especially young people. So it's really important to shed light on these other folks involved in the Amistad incident. And to that point, what other aspects of the Amistad story deserve a closer, deeper look and could use a spotlight on it?
I think the story of the Freemans, who were in Farmington, Mrs. Freeman, she had owned a boarding house that's no longer standing. I think a little more light needs to be shed upon the role that they played. Farmington is known as the Grand Central Station, if you will, of the abolitionist movement. And so I think we need to shed a little bit more light on some of the side players, such as the Freemans. I would like to know a lot more about them and have more of their story put out there. I also, an indirect story that I like is the protest aboard the Clotilda. Talk about the influence that the portrait that Joy was just speaking about, that was in, I think, James Fortin's office in Philadelphia. In his office, and I can never, Madison, his name was Madison. He was in his office and saw that portrait of Singbe. And James Fortin told him who he was. And he was inspired, and he did this protest aboard the Clotilda to get back home to his family when he was captured to be enslaved. So I think some of the incidental heroes from being the inspiration, people who were inspired by the Amistad incident. And I also like to think about Grabo is another one of the heroes. They often talk about how he did these flips and things for to be entertaining, but it helps you to understand just how I don't want to say cunning, but just how intuitive they were, how smart they were, because you're thinking I'm entertaining you. No, I'm actually staying in shape because when I get ready to leave, I need to be at my peak performance to be able to do what I need to do. I also would like to speak to the spirit of the Amistad captives when they were in Farmington. It goes back to how they were treated. Once they had went on their adventure to tell their story about being on the Amistad and what had transpired when they're trying to raise money to get back home, we don't hear a lot about how, and I think it was Grabo, and I could be wrong, or it could have been Fune. I'm not sure which one. I can't remember right now. But they were walking up the street, and these 2 men, less melanated men, wanted to start trouble. And the story was being interpreted that the Mende was a coward He wasn't a coward. He was sticking to the mission, and he did what he had to do. And he made his way back up the street. A block later, Elder Singbe handled the situation so that they could stay on point to get back home. So those are the types of stories those are the things that are left out that needs to be told a little bit more to speak to the resiliency of these individuals who were determined to get back to their families.
Joy.
So I think that what I would like to see highlighted is the hundreds of Black people in Connecticut, in New York, in Philadelphia, a cleaning lady in Maryland. Okay, she gives her life savings, which might be like $25 or $30, her life savings, she donates so that they can go home. So all these people, all these churches, all these mutual aid societies, they dug deep. They had cake sales, bake sales, whatever it took, collecting week after week after week. And it is the Black Americans who sent the Amistad captives home. Okay? It was not very wealthy, a group of very wealthy white men who paid their way. It was the barbers, the stewards, the cleaning ladies, the maids, the pastors, the people who would sweep the streets, farmers. It was the regular Black people who sent the Amistad captives home. And that's definitely a part of this story. And then the other part of this story, I think, is we need to learn more about what their lives were like in Westville. And as Charles knows, I spent the last 4 years looking for the site of the farm, so that I could say, between these 3 or 4 blocks, this is where the Amistad captives spent most of their time in Westville.
Wow, nice.
So often, especially when you talk to Al Marder, Al is one of the people who was the co-founder of the Amistad Committee, celebrating its 150th anniversary, and then also one of the founders of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. Al calls the Amistad incident the first international human rights crisis. How do you all feel about that title, and how, for the public, can you share how that might be the case?
I don't think it's the first international public crisis, because when you have millions of people being shipped through the Middle Passage to different parts of the globe, but I will say that it is the first recognizable one, the one to get the most attention. Right. I think, it gets the attention. It helps you. I think it's the story that shines the spotlight that was much needed to be able to tell the stories. It's sort of like Roots was back in the day, Alex Haley Roots. Before that movie, and I know there's a controversy about that, but I don't really see it as a controversy, because it helped to get our people interested in where we came from, and to understand that our slavery isn't our history, but that it interrupted our history. So to me, it's pivotal, like Roots was. It shined the light on something that needed to be blown up, so that people can really take an intricate look at it and not just scan over the surface.
Joy, same question.
So certainly the American abolitionists had been traveling to Scotland and Ireland and the UK to give talks and to raise money for the American abolitionist movement. But I think the thing that Al is correct about is that this incident just lit a fire under them that just carried them through into to 1850. To the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850 just was a really crushing blow to them. But between 1839 and the Amistad captives in 1850, this lit them on fire, and they just decided, we're going to go full tilt. We're going to do everything we can to help enslaved people to become free. And they mobilized, they raised money, more people joined their cause, and it just really made it much easier. And people like Thomas Van Rensselaer, who was the person who helped Antonio escape, because Antonio was still considered property of the Spanish crown. So even though the Mende people were freed, Antonio was not. And the Spanish crown sent a letter, to the American government, to the State Department or whatever, saying, please turn Antonio over and we want him back. Lewis Tappan finds this out, and Antonio is told this. Antonio writes a letter to Lewis Tappan that says, man, you got to get me out of here before they come and get me. And it is Thomas Van Rensselaer, who it's probably Simeon Jocelyn or someone like him, who comes to New Haven to take Antonio to New York. And then Thomas Van Rensselaer takes Antonio from New York to Canada. And so that is the magnitude of all of these connections that they have built in this time, in this 2-year period when the captives are here. It just really creates this incredible network that helps them to move enslaved people and runaway people to become free.
And this certainly highlights, right, the different sort of technicalities, certainly in a legal way, of who is quote unquote free and who is not. I have a question from the chat, and I'm going to read it. And this one, in the last document, I believe, Joy, it looked like the church sermon was called "Make Us Free." Do you know who might have preached that sermon, which it seems would have been about the Amistad captives?
So I think that Make Us Free was something that was kind of an ongoing theme for the Amistad captives. It was a relatively short phrase that was easy for them to say as they're learning English. And so that was a phrase that they used again and again and again. And that's something that you see in the letters. And I think there's also a book that's about, what is it? All We Want Is Make Us Free, or a poem or something. And then it was taken up by the American abolitionists. So I'm not exactly sure if there was a specific sermon, but certainly in the public speeches that the Amistad captives gave, this was a phrase that was used over and over again.
Well, let's see. Here we are in 2023 having a discussion about an incident that started in 1839. All over the country, there's controversy around studying and highlighting history. Why is this story still important today?
Tammy, you're muted.
Y'all can't read my lips. Okay. It's so important for many reasons, but it's the resiliency for me. It's the determination. And it was a 2-year battle that would change their lives for the rest of not only their lives, but it would change the trajectory of so many things. And so I think the resiliency, the determination, that's what speaks to me the most, because you just think about different situations and that you can be in and how you can get out of it. And I like the fact that it was not a bunch of elders coming up with these ideas. These were young people. And sometimes today we don't give young people enough credit, but here you have a group of young people who were less than 30 years old, who were determined. And I love the fact that they knew who they were and that they were not going to just give in. So I think it's a story of resiliency, that a human story that we can all relate to.
Joy,
So
why is this story? Why is it relevant?
I think one thing that's relevant, and that was one of the things that started me out researching it, was I realized there was an absence of the voices of Black women. And that, I think, is one of the most powerful aspects of this story, is that the female voice, the female adult voice, is silent in this story. There are no adult women, Black women present in this story. And that was something that was riveting for me. I agree with Tammy, resilience, and meeting adversity and knowing who you are and maintaining your own dignity and sense of self. That was it in spades. And the boldness of Kali, the boldness of this little boy to just say, I got something to say, it. I'm going to say it. You know, wherever they go to Lowell, Massachusetts to a mill to give a talk, and the mill owner is so taken by them. And Kale speaks. He's like, oh, Sinke isn't the only one who can talk and tell our story. He just, I have something to say and I'm going to say it. So it's also that children have a contribution, that just because you're 11 or 12 years old doesn't mean that you don't have something to say and contribute. Yes, exactly. Somebody said, imagine Kali on TikTok. Oh, that boy would have millions and millions of followers because he is off the hook.
No, so true. I think the other beautiful part of this story is, with America going through so much and sort of really underscoring man's inhumanity to man, I think the way that rich and poor, Black and white, worked together to be able to make sure that these Amistad captives rightly were freed and had the opportunity to go home. I think the other part that really highlights the best of humanity and the true sort of message of what America was touted to be. We are close to the ending of our time. I really want to thank both of you for such an engaging conversation and for the wonderful information that you have shared with the public. I learned. Listen, I learned. So you all did your jobs. Plus, we could have another conversation. Hopefully, in the future, we all will. I would like to thank a few folks. I'd like to thank the powerful but not visible right now, Mariana Garcia, for organizing us and handling all of our tech and making sure that we can be visible and present with the public. I'd like to thank Sally in the Old State House and the Connecticut Democracy Center. I'd like to thank the Connecticut Department of Tourism, the State Historic Preservation Office, Todd Levine, and all the folks that represent the 162 sites associated with the Connecticut Freedom Trail. I'd like to thank the Amistad Committee Incorporated and the members of the Connecticut Freedom Trail for sharing Connecticut's history, sharing the past, and helping us to determine a brighter future. Thank you all.
Thank you, Charles and Joy. And before we go on our upcoming programs on the conversation at Freedom on the Freedom Trail for Tuesday, May 23rd, we have two this month, bringing the Freedom Trail to life for real with Andre Kitt. And then Tuesday, June 27th, we will have the beginning of another trilogy. It is telling our own narratives. And the first one up will be the Peters descendants. That will be the descendants of Caesar and Lois Peters out of Hebron, Connecticut. Thank you so very much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate you supporting the program. And again, please, the surveys, fill them out. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you would like to see next. So until the next time.